We start video number 2 talking about infectious mononucleosis, an infection with a virus that I can guarantee almost everyone in this class has at this present time. The Epstein-Barr virus is actually a human herpes virus, given the designation number 4, or HHV4 for short. It's not the same as HSV1 and 2 that cause genital and oral herpes, but a different member of the herpes family of viruses. It establishes a latent infection in B cells, meaning that it exists and replicates in B cells. If you get this infection when you're young, you tend to get over it very quickly. If you somehow avoid becoming infected until later in your teen years or as a young adult, then you're going to have this condition of infectious mononucleosis, aka kissing disease, as it is sometimes referred to. When this condition develops, you get a severe sore throat, fever, and very inflamed lymph nodes of the neck, fatigue, loss of appetite. You may, in fact, even develop a slight skin rash. Infected B cells will not undergo apoptosis. They remain in the system. So pretty much everyone in the world will eventually become infected because there is always a small percentage of individuals that will reactivate and start shedding virus, ensuring that everybody becomes infected. How do you diagnose this particular condition of infectious mononucleosis? Well, a sick individual will have a blood smear examined and have these unusual lobed B lymphocytes in combination with low levels of neutrophils. Like most viral infections, the treatment is going to be focused on relieving symptoms because the individual will eventually get the infection under control, although will never completely clear it. The infection lays dormant in B cells, and it will remain with them essentially for life. The Epstein-Barr virus that causes this infection is also implicated in other types of conditions, including a couple of cancers like Burkitt's lymphoma and oral hairy leukoplakia, where you see these lesions on the tongue of this individual. The Burkitt's lymphoma tends to be concentrated in areas where you also find malaria, so it seems that there is some sort of co-infection that leads to the condition because you don't find it everywhere. So in sum, infectious mono is a condition primarily of teens and young adults who become infected with the common virus later than usual. The virus remains latent in B cells. Most of the human population is infected and periodically reactivates to shed virus in saliva and bodily fluids, ensuring that just about everyone will acquire the infection at some point. Our next infection in our discussion list is a viral hemorrhagic fever. You have probably heard of it. The name evokes a fearful response for good reason. Ebola. Ebola and its relative, the Marburg virus, have a very high mortality rate once transmitted to an individual. This image of the causative filamentous virus is colorized to make it look more interesting. It's a very dangerous and lethal virus. Ebola has up to a 90% fatality rate in some outbreaks, although with good supportive care, this rate has been somewhat reduced. It is transmitted by contact with bodily fluids of an infected individual. The reservoir for infection is hypothesized to be an animal, likely a bat, but it has not been definitively demonstrated as yet. Afflicted individuals will experience incredible diarrhea, vomiting, and bleeding from orifices such as the nostrils, mouth, and ears. Contact with any bodily fluids can transmit the infection. The incubation period is 2 to 21 days, and again, there is no treatment. Supportive care, attempting to help the individual maintain while their immune system is activated, is the only treatment. A vaccine is under investigation. There has been some clinical trials, but as of now, there is not a vaccine widely available. This table from the CDC website shows the total Ebola cases during the large-scale multi-country outbreak that occurred from 2014 to 2016. You can see listed many different countries in Africa, but also other countries throughout the world because of travelers, including medical personnel that provided their services and brought the infection back with them. Overall, there was 28,000 plus individuals that were infected during the outbreak before they could get the outbreak under control. There were over 11,300 deaths, which is just over a 40% fatality rate. This is a highly lethal virus, and in some of these places, they do not have very good health care to support people that are infected. Moving on from the viruses, we'll next discuss a look at an example of a protozoan systemic disease. The protozoans belong to a group with a complex life cycle called the apicomplexa. Malaria is a systemic protozoal disease, and I'll bet you already know it's transmitted by the bite of a mosquito. It is an endemic disease in over 100 countries. We do not have it in the United States currently because of our work to try to eliminate the mosquito vector, but worldwide there's 1 to 3 million deaths annually, mostly children, due to this infection. So this is a deadly disease causing many fatalities each year, in part because of the high number of people that become infected with malaria. So keep that in mind. Consider just for a moment how many people are dying from this disease every year, and yet has not received the same kind of attention as the current pandemic. With concerted efforts, this disease too could be better managed so fewer people would die. Plasmodium is the protozoal organism that causes the infection. It infects red blood cells among other cell types during its life cycle in a human. There are 4 species that cause human malaria, but Plasmodium falciparum causes the most severe disease. This is due to its indiscriminate preference for any red blood cell, young or old, and thus the higher parasitic load of individuals infected with this specific species. These are some images. You can see the scanning electron micrograph where some of the parasites are inside a red blood cell. Here's a more typical micrograph of parasites inside red blood cells as seen when looking through a light microscope. And over here you can see the Anopheles mosquito that's responsible for transmitting the malaria. What happens is that the mosquito can pick up a blood meal from an infected individual. The organism will undergo some life cycle changes in the mosquito itself, and then it is going to be injected into the next host as an infectious form when the mosquito next feeds on a human blood. You don't have to remember all the names of the life cycle stages, but it will infect a human with a specific stage of the life cycle. At first, those infectious forms will go to the liver, go through some more developmental cycle changes, and emerge and circulate as an infectious protozoa in the blood. In the bloodstream, they start to go through this erythrocytic cycle, which is the cycle of malaria leading to the characteristic signs and symptoms. Malaria-causing protozoa coordinate their movements. They infect new red blood cells, multiply, and emerge to infect new red blood cells in a synchronized manner. This cycle corresponds to the shaking fevers, intense body aches, and other symptoms that wax and wane during malaria. Some of the organisms will then go on to mature and get picked up by another mosquito. This graphic from your textbook is worth a read. You can get an up-close view of the Plasmodium cycle if you wish. I'm not going to be asking you specific questions about the names of the life cycle stages of the Plasmodium organism, but I do want you to remember the vector, and I want you to remember that it infects the liver and then emerges from the liver and infects the red blood cells, where they undergo repeated cycling to infect new red blood cells. There are quite a few other very interesting infectious diseases covered in this chapter, but we don't have time to go over them. You don't have time to assimilate all that new information, so we'll stop here. I do recommend looking through these chapters when you have a bit more time to be exposed to more of the infectious diseases you may encounter, especially if you enter a healthcare-oriented career. So this will conclude the overview of the systemic diseases in Chapter 21. See you in the next one.